right? Where I'm just not asking about the biological symptoms of sleep, mood, and appetite. I'm asking about what is their social support? Who are they connected with? I actually recommend this to everyone. I call it the Trifecta Rule. Every human on this earth should have at least 3 people in their lives that they trust implicitly, who will honor their confidence, who will give them advice, not because they like you, but even be critical of any decisions you're about to make. And that, again, sounds very simple, but again, that is missing, especially if as a country and even as a world, if we're in this epidemic of loneliness and things.
Yeah.
Well, I am super excited about this episode. We have been planning it and having it in the works for a while. Since the time I've met this gentleman, I was very impressed with him. So just to give you a little background, I met him through the Hope Line strategic planning meetings that I go to. We had one of our guests in the past, Meg Ross, to come in and talk about that. And he also serves as one of the strategic planning committee members and helping to get that line kind of going. But he has a very, very illustrious background and a very interesting place that he wants to kind of take his expertise. And I found it really interesting when I met him. And from that point, I wanted to get him on here so he could share this insight with some other people, because to me, it was just incredibly innovative. We have Dr. Rahul Mehra. He is a founder and creator of Emotional Vaccines, which we'll explain what that is later on. He's a board certified child and adolescent and adult psychiatrist. His big, and correct me if I'm wrong, your big thing is emotionally resilient people. Is that correct, sir?
Yes, that is correct.
So thank you again for taking the time to sit down and talk to us. I find it just, like I said, super interesting. And I think it's important that the other part that I found very interesting is he's one of these people who will take something that's really, really on the intellectual level way up here, and he has no problem with kind of breaking it down so that us common folks can understand it.
Perfect, because we might need to bust up the crayons.
So, sir, can you tell me a little bit about yourself? What led you into the profession that you're in now?
Sure, certainly. Well, thank you both. I'm honored to be on your podcast, and thank you both for your service for not only our community, but our country as well. And that's something as a naturalized U.S. citizen that means has a significant amount of meaning to me for that. So how I became a psychiatrist, in medical school is when you're doing your rotations in your third year of medical school, when you're doing pediatrics, OBGYN surgery. I did psychiatry, was my last clinical rotation at the Medical University of South Carolina in Charleston. And I had a great mentor, and he was board certified in psychiatry and in family medicine. He was not afraid to examine these. And I thought, well, wow, this is cool. I have an interest in the emotional well-being of people. So that's why I thought I chose psychiatry. Well, I didn't realize 2 years later that was really not the reason. What I learned after my residency is, and I'm going to share some serious things as part of this conversation, is that I learned something about my mother, that as a teenager in India, where I was born, she was raped by her first cousin. And that trauma, and then fast forward, my parents had their first child before I was born that died at age 2 due to a congenital liver problem. And then you fast forward, we then immigrated to the United States in 1966. When my older brother, who's also a physician, went away to medical school, my mother literally became psychotic, which means that she had delusions and paranoia, that there were neighbors that were watching her. So if we think that in today's world that resources are limited, especially in rural communities, imagine what this was like in a small town in the South in the late 1970s. So talking about this topic, it's not from an intellectual perspective, 4 years of college, 4 years of medical school, and 5 years of residency. It is actually from the perspective of a son who has touched it, felt it, seen it, and who has thought through of what can we do differently rather than just the reactive treatment model. So that is a long answer to your question about why I chose psychiatry. My mother, when I was at medical school, had a serious suicide attempt, and that topic is also difficult for people to talk about in today's world. So I was, in my 20s at the time, but figuring out and navigating those life events. And I was blessed by God to have two amazing parents.
So let me jump in, and I'm sorry that's
Sure.
That's a lot to kind of take in. I wrote a couple notes down, but I kind of want to break through it. So how old were you when you left India?
I was the tender age of 5 in 1966.
Okay. Wow. Okay. So your parents came, and then where did you end up coming to in the United States?
Yeah. Initially, we moved to Statesboro, Georgia, then to the outstanding community of Gaffney, South Carolina. And you may naturally be thinking, well, where is Gaffney? And yeah, right. Well, Gaffney's is halfway between Blacksburg and Cowpens. So that clears things up for you, right?
No, it does not.
I do not. I'm tracking a little bit. It's rural is what I'm understanding.
Yes. That was a feeble attempt at humor.
No, it's good. I'm tracking what you're saying. I'm tracking.
It's in the upstate of South Carolina. And it was an amazing community that I and my wife still have attachment to. We have a second home there where I grew up in the same community.
So you moved from India, which, I mean, I've never actually been to India, but it's highly populated. Then you move at a young age to a rural area in the south of the United States in the 60s. I'm just trying to get a grasp on what were you dealing with? What were you looking at? I mean, you have fond memories, so I have to assume that your childhood was filled with fond memories from that area and that time frame.
Yeah, well, the memories are of one only happiness.
Yeah.
And I can attribute that to because of my parents. What is sometimes not understood, Tyler, is that the emotional state of children is a direct correlation to the emotional state of the parents. And my parents were of the attitude that when in Rome, do as the Romans. I mean, they had some very traditional Indian values, conservative values, but in terms of myself and my older brother, that they wanted us to integrate to the community. And so as such, we were welcomed by the community. And that is why I decided to go back there and have a second home. And I have some deep ties of friends from the second grade who mean the world to me, and many along the way as well. So that's if you're asking about my experiences, that's it. And really the other quality of my family is one of faith. Yeah. And yes, it was a huge quantum leap to make, right? We didn't have any biological family around. Worthy at the time in Gaffney in 1968 was the only Indian family in town.
Well, I was going to ask that as well, because sometimes there's communities that kind of arise, but so you've answered that question. What did your parents do? Were they also, did they go to college? Were they doctors and then immigrated to the U.S., or what was their status, I guess, in the U.S.?
Yes. So my father was a biology professor. He actually came over in the 50s to get his master's and his PhD at the University of Illinois. And he was apart from my mother and my brother for 5 years without seeing them. Wow. I'm the epitome of a classic American dream where my father was not motivated by money, but he was motivated by a better life at the time in the 60s for his two sons. And then ultimately he came back after earning his PhD, and then they had me, and then he decided to move the family here. And that was really against the wishes of both his parents and my mother's parents and things. But and I know where I get it from both of my parents, very determined people, and I really don't like hearing the word no. And so it is what it is. Yeah. My mother had a couple of years of college. She in India had started a kindergarten. And so both of my parents were really that life was about service to others and not about yourself.
Got it. And so you mentioned a horrific event that happened in your mother's life, but what I'm understanding is it never really presented or manifested until you were older?
Yeah, it was when I was in high school.
Oh, wow.
And even in the process of the manifestation, she was what I referred to as quietly psychotic. She wasn't someone that was disruptive or having behavior, that would cause anxiety. It was the demons inside her head. And in that process, she was able to still maintain a home and cooking and very traditional things. She never worked outside the home, but always very kind. So I was very fortunate.
When that occurred with your mom, was there an opportunity for any kind of help at that point just
Oh,
because of the
sure,
times?
sure. My father went over to the next city over, Spartanburg, South Carolina, to
Mhm.
find the help at that point in time. And Mo, it's, in looking at currently where we are with, quote, the mental health, even
Right.
that term I'm not too excited about, and I'll explain that later, is that, we have overall made definitely progress, especially over the last 100 or even 500 years when we're talking about emotional struggles. And so at that time in the amount of medications that were available were very limited. I watched my mom having some significant side effects to the limited medications and things. Fortunately, in today's world, we have some better medications, which are helpful. But yeah, no, there was the traditional pursuit of treatment that my father did for her as best as he could in that moment in time.
You're starting to name cities I'm aware of now, Spartanburg. So we're getting there. We're getting closer.
All right, we're getting closer.
We're getting closer.
I knew that one too.
So this is next on the list, but I think if it's okay, can you explain the difference? And I think it's the overabundance of information, but also the lack of depth. What is the actual difference between a psychiatrist, psychologist, licensed social worker, therapist, all these different things? Because people are seeking help, and sometimes you'll have to kind of bounce around, which can. Sorry, just a quick diatribe. You're bouncing around. You've recognized you need help. You don't know where to go. You start Googling or whatever it is, or you get somebody to refer you, and you start getting bounced around, and it can be very frustrating while also you're still trying to be like, I need help, but I am getting told no by multiple people.
Yes. So Tyler, in that question, there's really a lot to unwrap, but I'll keep it simple to the response.
Thank you.
That the difference between psychiatrists, psychologists, LCSW, which means licensed clinical social worker, or school guidance counselor, or nurse practitioner, or physical assistant. The basic issue, the challenge for the general public is healthcare literacy, is what you just said, is not knowing the difference. The difference is rooted in overall training and scope of what someone can do. It does not mean that one discipline or profession is better than the other. Everyone has its own role. So a psychiatrist is a MD, or someone that can also have what's called a DO, Doctor of Osteopathic Medicine. And so that means we have both gone to medical school. And after 4 years of medical school, you then spend time in residency. My total amount of time in residency was 5 years with a subspecialty in child and adolescent psychiatry. The common statement when you ask someone, well, what's the difference between a psychiatrist and a psychologist? The common response is, well, a psychiatrist can prescribe medications. Yeah. Well, that is true. But if you're talking about depth, Tyler, you need to understand what that represents. That means that in 4 years of medical school, we are understanding the physiology of the body and the brain. That is something not necessarily that every psychologist or every licensed clinical social worker goes through that amount of training. Nurse practitioners may do more so, and then physician assistants may have some more of that. So it's the training and the scope that's the essential. Licensed clinical social workers, have the utmost respect for them. Their prism is more on the social dimension of things, which is a critical component. The way that my profession, the psychiatric part, has evolved to, which I believe it's an unfortunate, is that we are very focused on the biological part of treatment, which means medication. In my over 25 years of work in foster care, I spent more time taking children off of medicines than putting them on medicines. While I firmly believe in the role of medicines, it has overtaken for multiple reasons what a psychiatrist does in today's world. And so it is that healthcare literacy that is not really even well understood by employer groups, not well understood by military and other dimensions of life. This is not a criticism. It is just a observation because I deal with this every day. I'll get calls from family, friends, neighbors saying they need a psychiatrist. And after I start talking to them, no, you actually don't need a psychiatrist. Let's start you with a licensed clinical social worker. And then to your point, Tyler, is the navigation of that. That's a whole nother 2-hour podcast on that. So access is a concern.
No, for sure. And you're touching on something that was near and dear to my mother's heart, which actually launched her into the medical profession. She was an engineer by trade, started taking care of my grandmother, her mother, and she was on, tries not to exaggerate, something like 46 different medications. And when she started digging into it, she got her down to like 7 because she was taking medications to counteract the whatever one medication, and so it just kind of started multiplying. And to the chagrin of my grandmother, she believes it extended her life probably another 10 years. You'd have to understand my grandmother. She's like, "Why are you doing this to me?" Anyway, so you're touching on something that I'm outside my scope, but it's a passion of my mother's, which then led her to want to be a doctor in her 50s. So anyhow, that's a whole nother thing. But it's funny you mentioned that, and that you spend time trying to get people off medications.
I was listening to you when you're talking about the more focusing on the physiology of how the brain and looking at that from that perspective, and then looking at how psychiatry has evolved to really being more biological, which equals medications. Are you more coming from the perspective of wanting to look at people from a more holistic view?
Yes, sir. I mean, yes, ma'am. That is, apologies, that is my perspective. Is that one way for me to explain that this is something I learned in residency and it spoke to me then. If we're all trying to understand ourselves emotionally, if you think of 3 circles, essentially a Venn diagram where 3 circles overlap each other, biological, psychological, and social. Biological means our brain chemistry, our genetics. What are we predisposed to biologically? Our sleep, what medicines are we on? Are we drinking too much? And those are biological factors. Diet is important with that. Psychological has to do with self-esteem, feelings of hopelessness, kind of things that we are feeling. And social talks about our social connectivity. Are we connected to our family and friends? Where do we live? Do we live in a space where there's a lot of noise? Do we have green space? Do we have outdoors? Are we in a neighborhood where there's shootings happening all the time? And so that is the biopsychosocial model, which I ascribe to, an understanding a human.
Got it.
Sorry, can I jump in? Because I just want to understand. So I grew up all over the country, to be honest with you, but I've always felt more at home, more at peace, I guess, with myself in a more rural climate or environment, not as heavily populated, to the point now in my 40s, whenever I go to like a New York or a bigger city, Chicago, DC, I can actually feel matter of fact, I thought it was like a seasonal depression type thing, but I could feel myself I couldn't find my happiness, so to speak. It's hard for me to articulate that to you. And then you're talking about shootings in the urban environment. I have another buddy of mine, Monte, who grew up in the inner city of Atlanta, where 9 years old, selling drugs, people getting shot. Like he grew up in a very violent, rough environment, which kind of translated into some things later on in his life. So is that more what you're talking about, the population density type thing? Or is it, because you said green space, so I'm just trying to clarify.
Yes, absolutely. And the thing is, again, it's not really necessarily a criticism, it's an observation.
Yeah.
That if we're looking at the perspective of a child who's living in a neighborhood where we're hearing gunshots, that becomes a normal thing in their world. It's an unfortunate thing, but you have to think back about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which refers to that the ultimate beginning point is food, water, and safety and shelter. And those basic things need to be met. And though, is it my bias that there is, and I've already expressed that, is there more peace for me personally in a rural setting? Absolutely. For me, another way to conceptualize that is a lot less stimulation, right? Mm-hmm. The minute the plane lands coming back from South Carolina to here in Tampa and getting in the car or the Uber, Gaffney doesn't even have Uber. So what does that tell you? Yeah. That it usually are dear friends that come to the airport and pick us up. Well, imagine that concept of social connectivity, of having very reliable friends who are willing to do that. versus taking that Uber. Now, I'm not being critical of Uber. It serves a function. But immediately, if you get on 275 and the Interstate I-4 here in Florida, is that, your neck starts getting a little tense immediately and things. So,
Yeah,
yes,
sure.
I hope I'm answering your question, Tyler.
No, you are. You're just, it's like, you're suddenly like, you're putting pieces together that I felt, but I guess I never really thought about it or had it broken down the way you're explaining it. So it makes sense to me. I'm just trying to,
Sure.
for the layman out there, the knuckle draggers, I just want to make sure that I'm trying to put it out there.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Sorry, go ahead,
it's
Mo.
funny when you put it, like I said, you break it down into these smaller pieces like that to make us realize that, yes, I think in this world that we live in, people are very, very apt to want to find a pill that they can take that can fix whatever their quote unquote problem is without addressing those other pieces that are very important, because that connectivity, I think that, and this is just me getting on my soapbox, but I feel like that as a society, we have lost connectivity because of the wave of social media that gives false connectivity. I have 8,000 friends on Facebook, but I don't actually know any of them. Or I have this many followers on Instagram, and that kind of creates a space where, to me, it feels like if those are three legs of a table, one of the legs is constantly being sawed off with the way we are creating our society.
Yes, I agree with you on that. The social media, I'd say, again, for simplistic understanding, is that it doesn't matter if it's a youth or an adult, the more time you're spending in front of any screen, the less time you're spending in front of another human. And what is lost, again, going back to the biopsychosocial model, the brain is a very social organ. We need social connectivity. And I can give you a specific example. Some of the audience may have heard of this. It's called oxytocin, which is a hormone. And when women deliver a baby, or when two individuals are having sex, oxytocin is released. And at childbirth is released to create bonding between the baby and the mother. And when people are physically in the same room, oxytocin is being released. So, Mo, it isn't just a philosophical thing. There's a neurochemical thing that's happening to social connectivity.
I see.
That is lost when we spend our times all being virtual. I mean, we think we're being all cool with the emojis and all of that. And most of them, I don't really even know, or frankly, don't really even want to know. And things, because that if we then get back down to basic communication and reliability, we're relying on bite-sized communication, sending an emoji, assuming that someone's really going to understand what you are trying to convey, versus maybe picking the phone up and someone hearing the inflection in someone's voice.
100%.
And none of your social media friends are going to pick you up from the airport.
No, they're not.
No, they're not.
Tyler, I actually publicly talk about that. I give that same analogy, that if you are driving down the interstate and you've got 5,000 Facebook friends and your car breaks down, and how many of them are going to come and pick you up?
Not a one.
None.
Not a one.
So let me ask you, when you are practicing and you have a patient come in, what does it look like with the holistic plan that you have laid out? How do you attack all three of those?
Yes, great question. So I take the time in my work, not just in foster care, but as an example with adults and with working with professional athletes, is doing a detailed history within the biopsychosocial model. Right? Where I'm just not asking about the biological symptoms of sleep, mood, and appetite. I'm asking about what is their social support? Who are they connected with? I actually recommend this to everyone. I call it the Trifecta Rule. Every human on this earth should have at least 3 people in their lives that they trust implicitly, who will honor their confidence, who will give them advice, not because they like you, but even be critical of any decisions you're about to make. And that, again, sounds very simple, but again, that is missing, especially if as a country and even as a world, if we're in this epidemic of loneliness and things.
Yeah. But listening to my my son's about to be 20, but my teenage kids, their conversations, they're very surface level. And some of my friends I still have from high school, but we had very deep long-standing conversations. Again, social media wasn't a thing, and I'm in that bubble. I think all of us are. Where I grew up, I did not have a cell phone. I did none of this. I'm in that middle generation where it all happened when I was in high school, college times. I'm tracking what you're saying.
I think we also have a society where people are afraid to not think exactly alike. If I don't think exactly like Tyler, then I can't be friends with him. Or if Tyler doesn't think exactly like me, I can't be friends with him. And instead of realizing that I don't have to think like he does, I don't have to think like, Rahul does. We can have conversations and disagree and still go away from the conversation for being respectful during the conversation and still respecting each other after it. And one of those people that still, I welcome conversations from people who have different viewpoints and can explain things that I don't know or, can teach me something. So I think that we have a society of people that don't want to be open to that too. And this is, again, don't come for us on social media and say Street Tales said this. This is Monique's, platform.
Yeah.
Well,
No, fair
I
enough.
support Monique's perspective. And, because without disagreement, whether it's within a family, whether it's in a business or a superior, that it is disagreement that allows for growth. And you said the operative word of it being respectful, and that not everyone has a different journey and different reasons and different background upbringing for holding the things that they hold. And we just need to be respectful. We can disagree and then move on. Because the other thing that the social media part allows, and it's very unfortunate, is that you can hide behind a screen and a keyboard and you can attack, you can say things. And those are very harmful, not only for the recipient on the other side, but in general, the culture of the world where we are, where these things are being used in political forums.
Well, I want to get into emotional vaccines, but I just want to touch on that. So my prior career, I was in the Secret Service, and I can tell you that was one of the things that shocked me, frustrated me the most was you'd see these politicians having lunch, breakfast, cordial meetings, appeared to be friendly, and then 2 seconds later, they'd go out and tell the world that this is a Nazi and they're destroying the country and they're going to kill everybody. And I just watched you guys break bread and have like an hour long, what is, they just seem like it's normal discourse. It boggled my mind. And I tell people that, and again, you touched on the politics of it. It's like, they'll just, depending on what side of the aisle you're on, I can tell you good and bad things about both sides. But if you're super into one side, they're like, that's not true. That could never be true. They're all, I was like, it's not what you think. I've seen it with my eyeballs, watched it. It's maddening to me, but anyhow,
it's crazy.
It makes it worse.
It does. Well, I like that. And again, I want to say thank you for being so raw to explain to us what led you down this career path and what it is that you're doing and what have. But I wanted to really touch on, like you said, the emotional vaccine part, because this is something that I have never heard from anyone other than you. So first, if you can just kind of give us a definition overview of what do you mean when you say emotional vaccines?
Yes, emotional vaccines. Thank you for asking that. They're not actual shots. They're actually 2 to 3 minute videos with a strategy behind them. In the existing world, the mindset is one of a reactive treatment model. Seek therapy, seek psychiatry, seek TMS, seek medications. All of those have a role. What is missing is a proactive upstream role. And that's what emotional vaccines represent. If you think of what we are an organization of education and training. These videos that we have created are usually 2 to 3 minutes long. We have 3 verticals. One we call adult self-care. Number 2, called Families Thrive. That content is designed for parents, teachers, foster parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, youth service professionals, anyone involved with children. The third vertical is youth to youth, where the voice you will hear is a youth as if they're speaking to another youth. On the Families Thrive part, it is my belief that if you have a 10-year-old who is having disruptive behavior, the school says, hey, look, Johnny's not doing his homework. He's agitating his peers. I think you need, as a parent, to go have him evaluated because I think he has ADHD. Okay. Well, that right there, between someone making that recommendation and a change in 10-year-old Johnny's behavior, then going to seek some clinical help, there's a quantum leap in that. And I call it mind the gap. Need to be mindful That quantum leap is number one, is what parent wants to hear that. Number two is making an assumption that a family has the resources or the insurance to go get some professional help. And then number three is that then if they're going to their employer-based health plan, how do they find a qualified individual that has the experience in working with children and things? So all our goal is to do is to educate people. And Tyler, I'm sorry, just one final sentence
Oh, yeah.
is that theoretically, emotional vaccines represent this. Everyday life challenges every human on this earth goes through. How those life challenges are handled, or if they're handled appropriately, is what leads to more complex issues later in life. If we can start early with educating people about everyday life challenges and how to navigate them, we can create a difference in that. For a young adult who is formally diagnosed, 50% of the time by age 14, they have already started manifesting some symptoms. And by age 24, it's 75% of the time. The average length of time between when someone first has either some symptoms of anxiety or depression to the time they get formal help, I'm going to let you all guess, because I'm sure you are both have thought through this field. The average length of time when someone first starts experiencing anxiety, depressed mood to the time they actually get formal help.
2 years.
I was going to say
How
3.
long?
2 years
2
and
years?
3 years.
2
I'd say
years?
3 years.
10 years.
What? Because they seek it out or they can't find anybody? I might have misunderstood.
It's all of the above.
Fair enough.
It's the lack of awareness, right? The point is that things start with incremental changes
I see what you're
that
saying.
become bigger and bigger to the point that then there's a crisis mode. The reason, if we go back to the biology part of things, the reason that is important is that imagine that even though men can get breast cancer, that as a woman, if you had a lump in your breast and you waited 10 years, what might happen? The thing that happens in the brain is that the longer you wait, the more refractory to interventions things are. That's why that period is significant. Because let's take a 8-year-old who is having a ear infection and staying up all night. Mom and dad are not sleeping. The child is screaming in pain. Well, guess what? You can go to the emergency room and you can go to a pediatrician, outpatient, and get some help. Now, if you got a 10-year-old or 8-year-old who's having disruptive behavior, has been kicked out of school, how quickly will you be able to get in to see a child psychiatrist?
I would say probably
Maybe 6-8 months.
So you touched on it when I was like this, because I dealt with that personally with my daughter. And again, luckily, I work for the government, so I had good insurance and I'm involved father. She was expressing behavior that I was like, what is going on? Something's not right. And I went through, 20 different therapists, and they were like, it was like, unless she's hurting herself, hurting others or something like that, they were full or whatever. So I had to almost go outside myself a little bit, get a little froggy and pay out of pocket. And she still ended up getting linked up with a therapist who was gracious enough to talk to her, but her specialty was more like self-harm and harming animals, and like what I would say is really egregious, but I don't want to use the wrong words here, but that's not what my daughter was doing. It was just like, something's wrong. I don't know how to cope with this. And I'm her dad and I want her to be okay. And so, but it still took 6 months. And here I am not knowing what to do, not knowing who to talk to. Her primary care was like, she needs to see somebody. I was like, I know I've called 20 people. Everybody says no, they're full, or she doesn't meet the threshold or whatever. The frustration was very high. She met with this lady for a year. And the lady's like, she doesn't need my help anymore. And again, she's fine now, but it was just those moments, the level of rage and frustration. And I say rage because, after you're sitting here watching your child go through something and really you feel like nobody can help you and they keep passing you off. I can only imagine for people who, one, don't have the means or the resources, and then two, don't have maybe the wherewithal to just keep pushing and driving. You know what I mean? Like they just kind of give up. I don't know. And that breaks my heart to think of that, but you're touching on it because that is obviously a problem.
Well, 100%. And Tyler, I really appreciate you sharing that personal story about your daughter. And I'm glad to hear that she is okay now. But you're identifying really everything that we represent is that the number one most prominent thing is just educating parents.
Yeah.
Right? Is what happens is that when children are in treatment, they are very often, not every time, very often are treated in a vacuum, meaning it's just them. The children are a product of their environment. It's not being critical of any parent, but it is about educating parents on perhaps it's the age-old adage that if you want another human to change their behavior, you have to change your own. You can't control even that 10-year-old. I mean, you can to some degree, but you see what I'm saying?
Yes.
If you're not getting the same response, then there's maybe another way to kind of approach that question.
No, for sure.
So when you said the emotional vaccines are these videos that you have created in order to fill the gap, and that's okay, your child has been diagnosed or you've been diagnosed or what happened until we can get you to a therapist. This is what the vaccines are to fill that gap. And did I also understand it's for that individual that just has normal life, like they lost a loved one or something like that has occurred that is traumatic in itself, but we in our society write it off as just normal life. This is just something we all deal with. Is the emotional vaccines for that individual to help them how to cope with that trauma so that if later on there are bigger traumas, they know how to handle them? Is that what I'm understanding?
Yes, you are correct. So with our centralized library, we have over 300 videos and we add new content monthly. And it is my belief that when we're talking about, let's say, grief and death, common life event that probably all of us have gone through one way or the other, and how those things are handled, when they're handled. Yes, the videos go through just pointing out some simple things for an individual to do to mitigate that becoming a future problem later on in life. If someone has been diagnosed, yes, our content can be still used for that because the solutions to life and being happier are not really complex solutions. However, the execution of those solutions is what's complex.
Right.
And so part of our strategy is, this is something I created. I didn't go to medical school or residency for this. This is something I naturally arrived at in some work I was doing with Pasco Sheriff's Office in Florida when I was doing leadership trainings and the pandemic hit. And I thought, how can we educate people in a way that's non-judgmental? So our model is the way we execute this is enterprise model, meaning that our partnerships are with community-based organizations such as the Boys and Girls Club in Pinellas County, Florida. And they use our content for their staff and for their families and for the youth. Part of that is my strategy. That it's one thing that I can stay in my four walls and in front of a computer screen and treat people one-to-one. Great. We need that. That is not scalable. My goal is to take my knowledge out to where the people are. The people and the families are at the Boys and Girls Clubs. The reason significantly also is that they already have some trust with that organization. Right. So, and it's helping the organization perhaps redefine their culture on this topic, which still causes a lot of anxiety because all this is not representing treatment. It's just representing education and raising awareness.
That's amazing. I wanted to kind of piggyback when you were talking about the treatment not being complicated, it's being simplistic. I think the idea of 2-minute videos and making them so that they are simplistic for someone that might be in crisis, because what I have seen from a law enforcement perspective, sometimes when you encounter people in crisis, having them do something that's just super simple, unless you tell them step by step kind of how to do it, it just feels overwhelming for them. So this breaking it down into these 2-minute videos seems to be really beneficial. And I find it incredible that you're a very smart man, but I know there's other psychologists and psychiatrists out there. It's incredible that no one else has ever thought that this is something we should be getting ahead of.
Well, Mo, that's quite a compliment. And they accept it, but I don't, you're talking to someone that in a high school, the second time I took the SAD, I went down 90 points. So I really can't ascribe to the intellectual part. What I can ascribe to is a simple thinker. And you've raised a very important point, that why is no one else thought of this or no one else doing? Because I have an answer for you. It's very simple. There's no money in it.
I was going to say money.
The money is in treatment. You got to have a billable code, or you got to rationalize a reason. Well, you've got bipolar disorder, so this is what we need to do. Again, that's great. But so that's what I'm finding with our clients, is that they are willing to pay for this education because you know what? The fundamental thing is, again, simple. They care.
Yeah.
CAR.
Yeah.
Yep.
So
Yep.
with you saying that the reasons it hasn't been created is because there's no money in it, what made you want to create this?
When you, for 35 years, sit across from families who have lost children or an adult or a first responder or veteran to suicide, for this guy here, given what my mother went through, I want to do something differently. My nature is I'm a Libra, and Libras are very critical people, and we're critical of ourselves, and I just don't accept things as they are. And that's what drives me. It is my mother's memory, frankly. And then this was an evolution, right? Of after having chosen the profession and then re-examining what we were doing, that I've arrived at this.
Sir, I want to touch on, just coming up on time, and I'm being respectful, mindful of that, but I want to touch on emotional resiliency. You touched on it. And if I can, I just want to give an example and see if I'm hitting the mark. To your point, it's a graphic, uncomfortable conversation, but there were two females who unfortunately were snatched off the street and sexually assaulted. Both the same age, they're friends. And then when we responded, it was amazing to see the difference in how they reacted to that event. There was one, and again, I fully understand both. So this is not a criticism by any stretch of the imagination. One female was in the fetal position, would not respond, answer any questions, just kind of blank stare, to the point that I was like, is there something like, does she need, they're like, no, she's just suffering from the event. The other lady was up out of her bed, screaming and yelling, she gave the best interview. She knew who they were. She wanted justice to be it's almost like for her, the event was such an injustice. Like she wanted them to be caught, but her reaction to it. Now, again, this was immediately after the math. I have no idea what happened afterwards or, 6 months, a year down the road. I don't know any of that. It was just the immediate reaction to what had just occurred to them. And here I am reporting on taking the investigation, taking the report. But it was such a dichotomy from how the two people who suffered the same thing from the same people, how they reacted to it and how they were able to assist and recall. Is that what you're talking about when you're speaking of emotional resiliency, or is that maybe too specific of a point or specific of an example?
It's a good example, but Tyler, what I'd be careful of in that acute phase, that there is no normal or even resilient response. Yeah, be careful. The young lady who spoke and who wanted prosecution, and again, there's no right or wrong to it. It doesn't really mean to even imply that she was more resilient and things. The resilience is what I'm referencing has to do what we call protective factors. Right? When you think of a football player who's got shoulder pads, a helmet, those are physical protective factors to protect a physical injury on the football field. What we don't think about is that there's emotional protective factors. Those go back to the biopsychosocial model. Are we sleeping adequately? Are we over drinking? Are we eating the right foods? Do we have adequate social connectivity? Are we maintaining optimism in our family? What kind of environment are we living in? Because in life, while that's certainly an extreme example of a trauma and things, but it is going to default on the resiliency, and the responsiveness will be based on those protective factors. Are those protective factors and those individuals able to rise in the way of whatever, if we're talking about psychological, when the guilt or someone that an individual may have from because maybe as a veteran or a first responder, someone had to kill someone in the moment in their jobs. And how is that interpreted? Is that individual a person of faith who uses faith to cope and come to terms with? And so when I'm talking about emotional resiliency, the word resiliency even means how someone is able to bounce back from a tremendous event or an everyday life event and things. And how we bounce back is dependent on those factors that I talked about. And after one goes through that, then that environment around them, how are they then responding to help build that individual's resiliency? That's why our tagline with emotional vaccines is resiliency education. I hope I've answered your question.
You have. So now I'm going to switch gears because I'm understanding that was an acute trauma. So now I think this is for me. So thank you. So, because you're touching on things that I learned while I was in the career of, it's really local law enforcement, city cops, sheriff deputies, troopers, stuff like that. On the Fed side, it's a little different, but sleeping, dieting, drinking, all those things. My life prior to getting into law enforcement was 9 to 5. I slept my 8 hours, whatever. And then you get on shift work. So now your sleep schedule's all jacked up, which can cause different issues. What you're exposed to, like what I'm taking in my, on a daily basis is completely changed from computer sales and, keyboard stuff to like I'm dealing with real life situations. Diet is a massive issue. And it's funny that law enforcement agencies talk about diet a lot and nutrition, but they don't really talk about the mental health side, like getting your check-in, making sure you're talking to people. It's still quite a stigma on that. And then your physical fitness, because I'm tired, I'm working all the time, I'm not eating right. So now I don't feel like working out anymore either. All these things start to compound over time. And I remember, I think it was like 2 or 3 years in, I was as big as I've ever been. I mean, my uniform was as tight as it could possibly be. There's a joke that said my buttons were in emergency status. I mean, I was going off the rails a little bit. I had to dial it back, but it's not everybody goes through what I went through. Some people are better adjusted or able to deal with it better than I was, but it wasn't until much later that I realized I was even going through all these things and that I had totally stopped taking care of myself, and even just the physical side, but the mental side was even after that.
Sure. And, the two are obviously related, the mind-body connection. One of the reasons, Tyler, for the diet is important, again, this is an example where the general public may not necessarily know or understand. It's called the second brain. Is maybe perhaps you've heard of the neurotransmitter called serotonin. Serotonin is a chemical that's made by the body that regulates our mood, appetite, and sleep. Well, guess what? The majority of the serotonin is made in the gut. 80 to 90% is made in the gut, not in the brain. So what you eat is important in terms of impacting your mood and sleep. And the other point, Tyler, that you made is, and I don't know if you meant this, but if we're talking about a first responder or a veteran, of someone who is having some stress and they're maybe not talking to people, again, it goes back to what I said earlier about mind the gap, that the mindset is they need a therapist. And that's why over the last 20 years, in my judgment, there's been tremendous, and this is how Mo and I met, with the peer support network concept, where even though that has challenges, a individual is more likely to go to a fellow first responder or veteran than before the quantum leap to a therapist. Now, that even still has some challenges, but the important thing to note is that overall, because I started volunteering for first responders back when I finished residency in 92 here in Tampa, is that there's been significant overall improvement in the topic of willing to find solutions, but we still need to keep improving on that.
No, for sure. And I've talked about this many times. I was lucky because Mo was one of my zone partners, and we have another buddy of mine, BJ. Mo and BJ is younger than I am, but he has been seeing a therapist since he was in high school, maybe, I don't know, 20 years, something like that. And he talks about it openly. He doesn't give a crap what anybody thinks. And then Mo is a veteran law enforcement professional. And so when I started going through stuff and she saw me eating like a can of green beans and being like, bro, what is going on with your life? And I'm like, I'm struggling. She was there to help me. And the inverse to that was, I remember the first time I saw a child suicide, it was devastating to me. And I was trying to talk to a different veteran deputy. I won't use the name, doesn't matter. And he just goes, yeah, that's the job, man. You get paid twice a month. Suck it up. And he drove off. And I'm like, Jesus Christ. Okay, I guess that's how it is. Again, I'm lucky in the fact that I had Mo and BJ and I could vent some of this stuff off, not in a way to be like, woe is me, but like, hey, I need to talk about this because it's bothering me. And at the time, I didn't want to take it home and talk about it with my wife. And my God, my kids were 5 and 3. So, who else am I going to talk about it with, right? And so I'm lucky. Not everybody is so lucky. To your point. To your point.
One night, I know y'all need to finish up, but the one other, and I think would be remiss on my part, if we're talking about first responders and veterans, is that, the focus, yes, is on the emotional well-being, but it gets ignored the physical well-being because, again, of the mind-body connection. There's many reasons, right, with males primarily who may be reluctant to even get physically checked out for routine things.
Yes.
There's clear data that says that first responders will die prematurely compared to others because of that lack of self-care. So it isn't just emotional, it's physical, and it's the connection between the two. And that's why that some of these conversations we need to do our best to be able to normalize and not point out that, well, you're really having a lot of traumas in your life. It just, listen, you're having some stress that a lot of people don't, and it's okay to talk about it. The real line of first defense is coworkers, trusted family members, pastors, and other people, because that is a protective factor that is underutilized and is free without any barriers.
Yeah. And listen, I'm one of those guys that thought therapy and all that was voodoo magic, and I didn't want people touching me like a massage or a chiropractor. And you don't go to the doctor unless something's wrong, because if you go there, they're going to tell you something's wrong. So I was one of those people that felt what you're saying until I guess when you have children, you start to go, hey, I want to be around maybe for a little while. So I want to make sure I'm okay.
So in talking to you about the emotional vaccines, I know one of the things that you spoke with me about was some of the struggles, and you talked about it a little bit here with insurance and being able to get them to recognize the value in this addressing something prior to it becoming a crisis, that there's money in, just like we do an annual physical for our, insurance companies will pay for that. Why is there any forward traction in them starting to come around for the idea of allowing these emotional vaccines or mental health checkups before there's an actual crisis?
Yeah, there's some movement. We're having some early stage conversations with some payers and things, but again, we'll see how it goes, because Mo, what we represent is some movement. And when you're in part of a movement, and we don't have external venture capital, private equity funding and things, and we're a grassroots organization, and it's when you're going against the grain of conventional thinking, it's not easy. But I am up for the challenge.
Let's go. We got to touch on it because you brought it up. You said you're not quite a fan of the definition or description of mental health. What did you mean by that?
Yeah, and if you great. Yeah, happy to share my thought. If you walk into the top 10 CEOs of organizations and you start throwing around mental health, that phrase means so many different things to so many different people. And what an employer is interested in is productivity and bottom line. Certainly they care. Hopefully they care about their employees. But I have these conversations, Tyler, with consultants, major billion-dollar companies who are consultants for employer groups who have the same challenges. And there's clearly studies that not that people don't care. The conversation should be about the quality of life for their teams, not leading with mental health, right? Because even the word stigma, you even have to define, what does the stigma mean? I've spent hours thinking about this, right? And that's why I don't have a whole lot of hair. Is that, the stigma, in my judgment, is the inability of one individual, even in the confines of a family or a neighbor, is sharing with someone else that they're struggling with something.
Yeah.
That is the real, and we actually have a training that we've created, and it's called Care Champion Community. It's a 75-minute training where we're just, it's again, simple things like when you have another individual in front of you, whoever it may be, give eye contact, be in the moment with them. Don't be in a quiet place that's not full of distractions, where you have some privacy if someone is sharing something with you. You are not the one that needs to help find the solutions for them, but you need to be that empathetic person that listens and understands. That's so often what someone needs, is just another ear, where not someone is barking out things you need to go start doing and stuff, because that's the human reflex in nature, especially for males, to solve the problem.
Yeah, I'm still working on that too in my personal relationships.
Well, we all are. I'm still a male. I'm a male before I'm a psychiatrist.
Fair enough. It's like, I want to just fix it. Just tell me what the problem is. I'll fix
What
it.
do I need to do?
Sometimes
Just
that's not what they want.
Do I need to buy something? Do I need to hit somebody? What do I need to do?
Yeah, correct. Very fair. Very fair. Go ahead, Mel. Sorry.
No,
I talked a lot.
No, I love it. I love it. I just want to make sure that because this concept of emotional vaccines is so different, to me, it's just so important to make sure that everyone who's listening gets a full understanding of what it is and gets an understanding of where it is. Like you said, you're a grassroots movement, but in order for it to move, we need to get people behind it. And I know you said you're meeting with some of the individuals, the decision makers, the key players, what have to try to get it moving. And you said there's been some movement. Is it incredibly gradual, or is this something that maybe we will see in our lifetime?
Well, for me, even though this, you got to remember, this is an evolution over the last 4 years. And in those 4 years, when you slowly arrive at something, and in those 4 years, I had some major personal life events related to my health that kind of set back some of this. But my answer is this, is that yes, the movement that we've been able to make, for me, if somebody had told me this 5 years ago, is exponential. However, is it enough for me right now with still seeing the distress in the world? No. But we've had a conversation recently with the leadership at a major university in the College of Public Health. This is where this lies, because even in today's world, there really is no public health policy approach to mental health and substance abuse. Everything is a reactive mindset. And someone will argue with me and say, well, there's Narcan. Of course, that is a form of prevention, but that is tertiary prevention. There's 4 different levels of prevention: tertiary, secondary, primary, and primordial. Where we're missing is primordial and primary prevention.
Can you explain what you mean by that?
Yes. Think of your kids. I'm assuming here, Tyler, you taught them to brush their teeth.
Yes, I did.
And you taught them to wear a bicycle helmet for safety. Those are examples of primary prevention, which means you do something now. You wear a seatbelt in the car to prevent something happening down the line. In my field, we just talked about it at the beginning. There's basic healthcare literacy that's missing, number one, about what is a psychiatrist and psychologist. Number two, what I shared about everyday life challenges. How can we educate people such that would be more of a primary prevention strategy to educate people about everyday life challenges and the correlation between the two?
So for those listening, and just a couple more questions. So you have children, you're in a high population environment. What are some things that they could do to help their children have emotional resiliency and fall within that Venn diagram that you were describing? You mentioned sleep, diet, but what are just some practical things?
Absolutely. Let's take the example even further. Let's say it's a 12-year-old youth living in a heavily populated area. First step, as a parent, get off your phone, your Facebook, and screens.
To the parent.
To the parent.
Yeah, I like that. Yes.
Number two, then you talk. Let me share this kind of fact. Your average prisoner in a low security facility in the United States spends more time outside than your average teenager.
That feels true. Yeah. Okay.
Because they're required to be outside 8 hours or even less. The average teenager in the United States is outside 1 hour. So now you're asking me, what can a family do that's practical?
Yeah.
Get off your phones. Number one, we all know, maybe we don't know, that is changing the neurochemistry of the brain.
Yes.
A 12-year-old's brain is still developing and not developed till age 25.
Yeah.
You're impacting the neurochemical of the brain. And that neurochemical is also related to the psychological and social state of that being. Now, that also ties into sleep. In our current society, our adolescents are the most sleep deprived ever in the history of mankind.
Yes.
Okay, well, great. Why is that important? It is during sleep during sleep, it's not just about physical rest. It is when our brains are the most active during sleep. They're recalibrating the systems inside our brains, the neurochemicals and other things. That's that. Another example, when able, take your kids outside to the outdoors to a park that is available. Children need 3 basic things, assuming we have adequate food, water, and shelter. 3 things.
Yep.
A caring, loving adult, consistent, doesn't need to be a biological parent. Number 2, a hobby, not electronics, nothing gaming, none of this stuff. I don't care if it's stamp collecting. And number 3, and the reason for that is we all need something to distract our minds.
Yeah.
To allow us to feel good about ourselves, our self-esteem. That's actually at the epicenter of all of this, is our self-esteem. And the third thing is a sense of awe, meaning being able to communicate to a child that the world is greater than you and that you have unlimited potential out here in this great world. That involves the perspective of the caregiver, one of optimism and hope.
Yeah.
That was awesome.
Yeah.
That was awesome. Mo, you're doing a great job.
Well, those to me, like, it's so interesting because those are such tangible things that it doesn't cost money either. It's not something that will be limited by your socioeconomic status. These are things that just as a parent that you can do to create that emotional resiliency. So, and I love it too because I shared this with you before, Doctor, that me and my husband bought a house and built our house out on 5 acres so that our son, we have a yard fenced in so that, we were cops that saw awful things happen, but I wanted to move him to an area where I'd feel safe with telling him, go outside and play. And it's so funny because now, fast forward, he's 8 and he will say, oh, Mom, I need to go out and get some vitamin D. And I'm like, yes.
That's
It's
your
hobby.
great.
Yeah, he's got more
beautiful.
hobbies than anybody. Yeah, no, it's great. Yeah.
And to that point, there's a study I read recently. Out of the youth in the Netherlands are much happier than your average youth here in the United States. And one of the fundamental reasons is that they're still riding their bikes and going places because it's that unstructured activity.
Yeah.
See, the developing brain needs that for creativity and for emotions, rather than just having that screen in front of them and liking and doing whatever all that stuff is that I can't even keep up with myself and things. And so that's why, Tyler, the solutions are not, and remember what I said, the solutions are not complex. It's the execution of those solutions.
No, for sure. I mean, the fact that you're having it, and you're right, and I'm just processing everything you're saying, but parents need to get off the social media and the screens. I can't tell you how many of that I've seen. And then going outside, that glazed look was me thinking back to my children and me having to be like, go outside, go do something besides whatever it was. And also just their friend group, right? Their friends would be in the same room together and they're texting each other while they're sitting together. And it used to drive me insane. So just very simple things, what you're talking about, but related to my childhood, as soon as it was light outside, we were gone. And then our only rule was you better be back in before the street lights came on. It was never a thought to be like, hey, we're going to hang out in the house all day. That was not a thing that existed when I was growing up.
It's called grounding when we were growing up.
Yeah, you were grounded. You couldn't go outside. Now it's like you're punished if you have to go outside. There's such a shift.
You're exactly right about that.
Yeah.
100%. Another concept is called social referencing. What this means, who we are as adults is emotionally who we are as adults is a direct product of the ages of 0 to 5, 0 to 6. What that means, we learn emotionally based on our biological predisposition, the psychosocial stuff that's happening in our immediate family and our environment, meaning we learn how to modulate anger, happiness, sadness, through the nonverbal communication we are seeing in our environment, not the words, but what we are seeing and the emotional tone. That is why children that's why I've always been drawn to kids, because kids speak and like the elderly speak what's on their mind immediately without any filters.
Oh, yeah.
And the reason for that is that because they don't have all this gobbledygook in their head. They don't have to worry about paying the bills and doing all of you mowing the yard and taking the trash out. They are there in the moment. And that's why their ability to absorb things is enormous. But then you throw in the electronics and then all bets are off.
It's crazy.
Sorry, last question, because this is going to flip the script. Law enforcement parents. This is something I struggle with. I actually am still dealing with a little bit of guilt over, because it's things that I didn't realize till my kids are older. I'm dealing with it now, but it is what it is. I was going through my own personal changes. My own mindset was changing. I became a very different person when I became a cop. And, I was justifying it in my mind. I'm doing all these things. I'm providing for my family. But really, even when I was home, I wasn't home, because I was either sleeping or I had way more stuff on my mind than dealing with whatever it was my young children were dealing with. Now that they're older, actually, I feel more of a dad than I ever have, because I could talk to them and we could have these long form conversations. But all that to say, what advice would you have for, I guess it's not just law enforcement, but that concept of how can you be a better parent when dealing with that, or things to look out for? I don't know how to phrase it properly, but
I think I know what you're trying to say. Let's keep it as maybe not things to look for, how to be a more effective parent.
Yeah.
Yeah. And again, this is not judgment. Answer is simple. Pay attention to your kids. Does not mean going out and buying them fancy sneakers or the trendiest shirts, clothes. It means being in the moment with them. Your phone's not around. There's no TV show. You talk to them. You ask them how was their day. What are they worried about today?
Yeah.
The essence of things, what I said earlier, is self-esteem. In my judgment, self-esteem actually begins even before birth. What does that mean? That means a parent is going to have expectations, maybe no expectations. Maybe they weren't planning on being pregnant. That gets projected onto the unborn child. Children know intuitively, even as infancy, did they matter to the space in front of me? That's why when you hear about consistency, responsiveness, smiling, that's what all that's about. Get to know your kids better.
Yeah.
Tyler, they're consuming so much information. They know so much more than you can ever think of what they know.
Oh, yeah.
So am I
very
hearing
perceptive.
that regardless of the age of the child, that if we are present and consistent, that's really what our kids need?
Well, yeah, starting in infancy. And even if it's a 22-year-old and your daughter is at college, and if you say, honey, I'm going to call you tomorrow at 6:00 when I get off work, and you don't do that, it's okay. Human things happen.
Right.
But you see what I'm saying of the expectation and the consistency, because then the message is, I don't really matter.
Yeah, I've started something new. I text both my kids every morning when I wake up. Again, human. Sometimes I get busy doing something, but it's funny because I've been doing it for about a year now. And at first they would be like, why are you doing it? I was like, it's just a way for me to check in on you. And if you respond, good morning, or you give me a thumbs up, whatever your I know you're alive at least at that point in the day. But it's funny because now a year later, just a couple of days ago, I got caught up. I was doing something. I had an early day, and my daughter goes, "Good morning, Dad. Are you alive?" Like she was like, "Where's my good morning text?" I'm sorry, baby. I was dealing with something.
With our two granddaughters, I started this even with the older one who just turned 9 last week, is that when she would stay with us, my wife loves a coffee brand, and I don't want to promote the brand.
Understood.
Only promote Blackout Coffee.
Blackout coffee, we got it.
And so I get this coffee, and also what I would get for my granddaughter is a donut. And every time they're with us, and now she has a sister, it's a ritual that I do every time. And that is carrying over and it's creating a tradition and things. And it's those simple things that don't really cost a lot. It doesn't mean one needs to go out and buy coffee and donuts every time, but it's the consistent ritual of what happened. The home that I was born in India was my grandparents' home, a very simple and basic home. There was no toilet. It was essentially a outhouse. And, when you have these images of he's a physician, his father is a professor, you create these things. I grew up in a very simple and humble environment. because that's the other thing that's confusing and pressure on parents is that need to have more money. Yeah, they need basic food, water, and shelter.
Yeah.
But what they really need is ensuring that either for themselves and for their kids, is giving them the attention and consistency they need.
Awesome. Well, I think we're coming up on the time. I don't want to keep encroaching on you. I think that I find it just incredibly enlightening and interesting to talk to you. And I know Tyler, so I can tell he is the same way. So we don't want to take up too much of your time, too much more, we'll say. But if you can you give us some information for those listening, how can they tie in and get in? You have a website for your emotional vaccines and what have. Can you give that information out?
Sure. The website is www.emotionalvaccines.com.
Perfect.
And that's one way. And there's a page on there if you want to contact us. Certainly open to hearing from anyone. It doesn't even need to be that someone wants to engage with emotional vaccines, but maybe even someone has a differing opinion and maybe even disagrees with what I'm saying, and which I welcome that. I don't have all the answers. We're here just to try to help.
Absolutely. Thank you. Tyler, anything?
We'll leave it at that, but I was going to tell you, I'm probably going to send this to my psychiatrist, Dr. Podolsky, who was on the show, because she is in line with kind of what you're saying. And she also had an upbringing in Costa Rica, but a lot of the same things you're talking about as the holistic approach, the sleep, the gut. And we even had a probably 30-minute conversation on serotonin and how to build it, all these things. So I see that I'm starting to find myself surrounding and meeting people that have this holistic approach to not just mental health, but physical health as well. So
yeah.
Doctor, thank you so much. That was amazing. I will push this out, and I hope that it was good for you and we can have you back on, because now you got my mind going. I took a bunch of notes. I'm like, these are things I want to ask you now, but we'll do it. We'll save it for another time.
Sure. No, thank you both, Mo and Tyler. I appreciate what you're doing and educating people and educating yourselves. And please, that every time I learn as well. This isn't a one-way thing where I'm sitting on a throne giving all this stuff. It's a mutual reciprocal relationship. So I just want to express my gratitude to you both.
Thank you. Thank you so much.